Hello and welcome everyone to this session on cross-cutting issues in Cluster 5. We have I have a number of colleagues here with me. I have Tit Yureme, who is going to talk to you about social innovation. I have Vula Mega, who's going to talk to you about INCO. I have Anne Pepin, who is going to talk about gender, and Alea Lopez de San Roman, who will talk about open science. And myself, I will be talking about SSH integration, so the integration of social sciences and humanities, in a couple of minutes. If you would like to ask us any questions, you're very welcome to do so. Please use Slido. There is the QR code, which is on your screen right now. We'll get to those questions at the end of the presentations. Now, before handing over to Tit Yureme to talk about social innovation, let me say a few words about cross-cutting issues and how they're approached in Horizon Europe myself. Can I have my presentation on the screen, please? Yes, next slide, please. Okay, so cross-cutting issues really are a central feature of Horizon Europe. And this is because Horizon Europe is focusing on transversal societal challenges. The consequence of this, of course, is that if you have an interdisciplinary perspective, a number of aspects that cut across program divisions, they crop up in different places. And this is precisely what we call them cross-cutting issues. And working and along those issues and taking them into account avoids retreating into program silos, and it encourages more cross-sector collaboration. Now, those cross-cuts are also part of Horizon Europe's legal base, what we like to call the legal base, so the regulation establishing Horizon Europe, the general program, and the council decision establishing the specific program. In the regulation, you can find it, for instance, in Article 3.2, a reference to cross-cutting issues. And in the council decision, you find it, the council decision on the specific program, you find it under the operational objectives in Article 2.2. But of course, you also find references in other documentation regarding Horizon Europe, such as the strategic plan. If you look at the key strategic orientations, the expected impacts, the intervention logic, and of course, the work program itself. And actually, today, we were not going to go into much detail on these different texts, but we're going to focus only on the work program. Next slide, please. Now, we have 5 cross-cutting issues that we're going to be talking about today. First one is the mainstreaming of social sciences and humanities, SSH mainstreaming and citizen engagement. Then we have social innovation, we have international cooperation, we have open science, and we have gender. Not necessarily in this order, actually, since I presented a different order to you, but we'll get to that in a second. Before saying a couple of words about SSH and citizens, I want to leave you with one thought that actually applies to all those crosscuts, and that is that there's actually no benchmarks in what we will be presenting to you. There is nothing really there to gauge what is good integration of these issues or good consideration of these issues and how to measure that. There are different ways possible. Of course, you could look at how much money is spent, how often references crop up in the program framework, whatever. But this measure of what we consider collectively good or sufficient or appropriate consideration of these issues is therefore a matter of debate. And I would invite you to take part in this debate and not to leave this to program evaluations in a few years after the fact, and don't leave it to experts, but do participate in this debate as to whether or not the consideration of these crosscuts is adequate and good and satisfactory. Next slide, please. So just a few words on SSH and citizen engagement. The first thing I'd like to point out to you is that these things, SSH and citizen engagement, are often mentioned in the same breath, with citizen engagement actually taking the upper hand these days because it's somehow more in everybody's mind. But it's actually a misconception to think that they're the same, and it's an even greater misconception to think that social science and humanities, or greater focus on social science and humanities, can somehow deliver citizens to preconceived policy objectives such as greater acceptance. Rather, citizen engagement, when it's open-ended, which it isn't always, can generate more societal buy-in, precisely because citizens themselves participate in creating solutions. And these solutions, and that's important to point out, can differ from what policymakers had in mind. Now, this form of citizen engagement, of course, is different from corporate communications. It's not just top-down. And it also goes beyond public consultations and dialogue. It goes more in the direction of deliberate democracy. Now, social science and humanities integration, by contrast, doesn't focus on social mobilization per se. As I said, it's not meant to deliver citizens to policy objectives. Rather, SSH integration highlights non-technical aspects of climate, energy, mobility policymaking, which we are research innovation policymaking, I should say, which we're dealing with here in Cluster 5, such as behavioral drivers, value structures, histories of past mobilizations and transitions, political and economic governance issues, those sorts of things. And some of these aspects are really desirable from the policymaker's perspectives, but others are not. We're also talking about the sources of resistance, perhaps to policymaking, sources of inertia, those sorts of things. And it's important to understand them all if you want to do good policymaking, not just the ones that are favorable. So in conclusion, while both concepts are obviously related and SSH can have a normative component to encourage participation, equity, equality, those sorts of things, it doesn't necessarily have to. And it's a good idea to keep those two issues distinct while keeping in mind that obviously they are related. Good. Again, if you have questions, please put them into Slido. We'll get to them at the end. And with that, I would like, actually, no, I have, sorry, I have another slide before I hand over. There's actually, I forgot to tell you about the mechanics, the practical side of things, which is probably what you're most interested in. There's essentially three ways of how SSH and citizen engagement are integrated into Horizon Europe. And I'll put them up here on the screen. One, of course, is generic mainstreaming across the whole program map. And for that, you can look at the participant portal. There are topics that are flagged as SSH relevant. You can also look for references in the topic text. You will find some that have a particular sentence which starts with "this project requires SSH qualifications and expertise." So that's one way. The second way in this cluster is via specific sub-destinations. You know that the cluster itself is subdivided into destinations, and in one of those destinations, unfortunately, I should say, only one of them, you find a sub-destinations that deals explicitly with the social sciences and humanities. It's the first one on climate. Now, this is something that is very useful and that you find there. And then three, the third possibility is that you have dedicated topics that deal with SSH or citizen engagement issues specifically. So you don't just mainstream these aspects into more technical topics, but you focus on them to begin with. And we have 3 such topics in cluster 5, which are in a somewhat peculiar place when you look through the program, but they really apply to all of cluster 5, or they're meant to be relevant to all of cluster 5. One is on just transition, which obviously is a cross-cutting aspect. Another one is on strengthening SSH research communities, and the third one is on what we call transition superlabs to accelerate the transition in particularly difficult contexts. I talked about them yesterday in more detail, so I'll leave it at that now. But again, if you have any questions, happy to get to them at the end. Good, and now I'm really handing over to the next speaker, which is Tiit Jurime, who is going to talk to you about social innovation. And I see him on the screen already, so over to you, Tiit.
Thank you very much, Gerrit, and welcome everybody participating in his info days. My topic shortly will be on social innovation, and I think somebody's showing the slides, I hope. If I may, I would love to slides. Yeah, I'm here today replacing my colleague Philippe Martin, who is the ambassador of social innovation, I would say, in our DG and behind the social innovation concepts and ideas in Horizon Europe. Next slide, please. What I'm going to do is I'm going quickly to start with some examples, then the definition of social innovation and how to involve it in Horizon Europe, or include it. So next slide, please. And one of the very fascinating Horizon 2020 examples of social innovation, which Philippe was specifically wanted to somehow highlight in today's presentation, is a project Anywhere. And Anywhere is a project which has brought the state of art of forecast impacting on weather-induced events, flooding, heavy rain, severe snowfall, and so forth, to bring the state of art and link them to disaster relief organizations' work. And it has been extremely successful. It has involved the pilots in 7 countries, covering the whole Spain, for example, but also Italy, France, Finland, Norway, and so on. So it's a really fascinating project on social innovation, which I invite you to have a look. The next slide, please. But there are very many projects of social innovation already in Horizon 2020. You see the different themes covered from climate to food security. So there have been social innovation projects, and I really invite everybody to consider them in Horizon Europe equally. But maybe better to understand, next slide, please. Let's have a look what is social innovation, or how actually we define social innovation. And there are quite complex definitions of that, but I think the best principle to say is that social innovations are innovations like any other innovation, but they're innovations which are social in both in the ends and their means. They are innovations which are dealing with the problems facing society, but they also involve citizens, public authorities, businesses, industry in their design, development, and implementation. So I think this is very crucial, that innovation as such, in case of social innovation, is not done in isolation, but it is done involving the society and targeting society with these solutions. Next slide, please. So when to have social innovation in Horizon Europe? I think we, as the advocates for social innovation, would say, I think most of the time. It's literally everywhere. So whichever problem you are working on or tackling with, it is likely lends itself to social innovation equally, because most of the innovations are socio-technical. And it's important that we are now moving from pure knowledge creation, also linking that knowledge to society. So it is a really excellent mean, or sometimes even only mean, to connect society and innovation. It's also to involve citizens, to empower them to deal with problems they are concerned about, but also to become active participants, to activate them. And obviously, then the innovations become more relevant and useful as well. And very often, it is also very cost efficient, because activating and engaging citizens, public authorities, it actually costs little, but gets a lot of manpower for these this work. So you can use them, like Google and Facebook are often using us to build their systems. You can use also people to build innovations and knowledge, for example, through citizen science as a very straightforward example, to bring them into the project. So I think it should be really considered everywhere, whichever project a proposal so you are working on. And finally, I think it also brings an important aspect, because it's like acts as a system changer. So if you want to have an impact involving citizens and other actors from the start, already when building the knowledge, when starting to address the problem, is the best way forward. Final slide, please. So how to include it in Horizon Europe? So we are given a guidelines that it should be actually or encouraged to consider everywhere when you are addressing a problem which is not purely technical, but which is what we call socio-technical, or where the society is concerned. You see a lot of hints in the topics, which in the topic descriptions, where we think that that these is relevant when we have developed the topic descriptions, the destinations, the impact statements, that where we think that social innovation should be considered and is very welcome as a one way of addressing it. Engaging citizens, co-creation, participatory social innovation, non-technological. And there are some topics which are dedicated to social innovation. So there are few of them, because we believe that social innovation is actually everywhere and a cross-cutting issue. But obviously there are dedicated topics and now and also in the future work programs. So I think that will be my short overview of social innovation. Consider it everywhere. It is everywhere. And you don't need to start from scratch. Look around. There are social innovation initiatives around you in your region, in your country. And it's about making a link to them, empowering them, and scaling it up. Many thanks.
Thanks, Tiit. Thanks for making social innovation a little more tangible than it might be otherwise. I think you succeeded in that. And again, encouraging everybody to ask their questions on Slido. I'm handing over now to Vula Mega, who is going to talk to us about international collaboration. Over to you, Vula.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to address this audience today in this Info Day and present some highlights from our global approach communication and the implications for Horizon Europe and Cluster 5 in particular. The first slide, please. Just 1 month before the adoption of the work program, we had a communication on the global approach for research and innovation. You probably know that we had already a strategy for international cooperation adopted in 2012, but we can all agree that our world has changed considerably since 2012, and that this millennium had a great stock of surprises for us. Even before the last pandemic put the world on its knees, we were experiencing an increasingly diversified and multipolar global research and innovation landscape. The economic epicenter of the world advances toward the east and toward the south. New important science and innovation actors appear. It's very important for the world, for Europe to have a stronger voice in the global agenda. Next slide, please. The strategy that we adopted in May 18 in fact, reconfirms the openness of Europe to the world, but we want to be an openness that promotes a level playing field and reciprocity, and at the same time improves the world's capacity to advance towards the sustainable development goals that remain a very compelling compass. As we know, in the year of the pandemic, we lost ground towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So there is an overall need for collaborating in order to address our common challenges. Of course, this fundamental openness and engagement with the world has to be based on our fundamental values. These are not negotiable and include, of course, the academic freedom, ethics, open science and data, excellence and evidence-based decision-making, gender equality are very important principles and values. Next slide, please. The implementation, of course, will be done through our major instrument, which is our main funding instrument, which is Horizon Europe, and is the general, this general openness has to be really balanced with safeguards on protecting our union's interests and values. As a general principle, all researchers can participate from everywhere in the world, can participate in collaborative projects, and all entities in the world can get funding apart if they are in low, medium income countries, and only in the BRIC and Mexico that are considered to be higher income countries. They cannot be automatically funded. However, many of these countries have special arrangements in order to support the participation of their researchers. A very important element of our new strategy is that talks have been initiated with countries that we all know that we have associated countries that participate on equal footing in Horizon Europe, but talks have started with countries that are not in the EU neighborhood or in the EU proximity, but they are really demonstrate our engagement with the broader world on the basis of common values and principles. And talks have been initiated with exploratory talks with countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. Next slide, please. Of course, it's very important for the EU. One of our political priorities is leading on the world scene, and of course we have as our flagship main political priority the Green Deal, but also we want a digital and just and inclusive transition. It's very important to lead these efforts with modulated approaches through bilateral cooperation, but also through very important leadership in multilateral fora. The Commission also this spring launched a communication on rule-based multilateralism to increase its presence in multilateral fora. Next slide, please. When we come to climate, energy and mobility, so cluster 5 and its 6 destination, these are just some of the highlights where, as you can see in the calls and the topics, in some of them, there is international cooperation that is encouraged. In others, international cooperation is required. And it's very important to see in what issues and in what themes we have a particular interest, and we can really advance excellent research and innovation. Of course, multilateralism and purposeful openness are key principles. We have targeted actions, cooperation for the acceleration of clean energy innovation through mission innovation. Our cooperation with Africa is a must, from road safety to clean energy. And of course, cooperation on sustainable decarbonization for major emitting countries. Their destinations that they have a inherent fundamental climate itself has a fundamental global dimension, and of course is very important to have the best possible global engagement when we address these issues. I also, among the initiatives, since this is the cluster that has the most important number of partnerships, I refer also to the co-funded partnerships, bringing investors and co-funders together on cities. Cities do not only impact because of the sheer size, but also because of their powerful interconnected networks and the power that they have to promote their models to the world. And of course, for energy and transport research and innovation is extremely important to engage a high number of countries, and I would also invite you, apart to look the funder and tenders portal, to have a look on the global cooperation site and consult also the policy dialogues that we develop and roadmaps that we developed with the partner countries, third countries, and in which as in our global approach communication, they expressed some interest for some particular areas. Thank you very much, and looking forward to see your ideas and proposals engaging with the world. Thank you. And now Anne Pepin, I believe, has the floor.
Yes, thank you, Vula. That's exactly right. Anne is next. I see there's already a question for you, Vula, later on, so that's great. We're getting questions. And with that, handing over to Anne, please.
Thank you very much. So I don't see my slides yet, but I'll try in a few minutes to give you an overview of the requirements that you have to follow when submitting a proposal to Horizon Europe and to Cluster 5 in particular with respect to gender equality. Next slide, please. So gender equality has been strengthened in Horizon Europe compared to Horizon 2020. That's reflected in the legal base. And there are roughly 3 different levels that you should pay attention to. The first one, so I don't see my slide, I only see that in a very small view. Let me see, speaker view. Maybe this will, no. Sorry, I don't see them very well. Well, is that, okay. So basically the first, I should pin my image. Okay, sorry. Yes, now it's easier. So the first level is as an eligibility criterion. So that's having a gender equality plan in place. The second one is at the award criteria level. So that's the integration of the gender dimension into the content of research and innovation. And finally, I'll touch upon the gender balance issues, which are a ranking criterion for exec proposal. So next slide for the gender equality plan. Next slide. So this is a big change as of calls for proposal with deadlines in 2022. So not yet for the calls in 2021. Public bodies, research organization, and higher education institution. And for these 2 last categories, be they public or private, will need to have in place a gender equality plan to be eligible to funding in Horizon Europe. So this will happen through a self-declaration questionnaire. It will be part eventually of the legal identity validation process. So normally an institution only fill this in once, unless the status changes in the duration of the program. And there are specific requirements that you need to fulfill. Next slide, please. These are 4 requirements, mandatory process-related requirements. You need to have a gender equality plan or an equivalent document which commits to gender equality with targets and specific measures and actions to be put in place. And this needs to be a public document endorsed by the highest level of leadership in your institution. So publicly available on your website and of course disseminated through the institution. It needs to have dedicated resources, financial and or human resources, such as gender equality officers or specific teams or earmarked contribution from certain staff. It needs to be built on evidence. So you need to collect and monitor sex and or gender disaggregated data and annually report on this. And you need to do awareness raising, capacity building trainings on gender equality in research and innovation, in particular on unconscious gender biases. So these are the 4 mandatory things that you need to have to qualify to the gender equality plan eligibility criterion. Next slide. And we recommend, of course, some thematic areas to be covered in a gender equality plan. All these building blocks of gender equality plan have been co-designed with a large range of stakeholders, gender experts, national level representatives. So these recommended areas are work-life balance and organizational culture, gender balance in decision-making position, gender equality throughout the career progression, starting with recruitment, the integration of the gender dimension into the content of the research, and also teaching, if you're a teaching institution, and measures against gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. Thank you. And so a few things that you need to keep in mind with this eligibility criterion. It's a self-declaration. You don't upload your document, you just fill in the questionnaire at proposal stage. But you really need to have the gender equality plan in place at the grant agreement preparation stage. There's a tolerance between the proposal stage and the grant agreement preparation if your proposal is selected. And if you don't have, or if a partner in your proposal does not have a gender equality plan, and it should have, that partner will be rejected. If you have an equivalent document that covers the 4 mandatory process-related steps, it will be considered as an equivalent. When you sign the grant agreement, you commit to taking all measures to promote gender equality in the implementation of the action. That's the same thing as in Horizon 2020, but in addition, it should be aligned or coherent with your gender equality plan. And there will be random eligibility checks in the duration of the program. We are currently devising how we will proceed with those. Next steps. There's already a lot of material that's available for you to really design your gender equality plan. This GEAR tool was developed by us and the European Institute for Gender Equality. And more guidance, more written guidance is coming up in the following weeks. There's a pilot knowledge and support facility that has been launched. There will be guidance, but also mutual learning workshops and trainings, and also the creation of a network of national level contact points on this gender equality plan eligibility criterion. Next slide, please. Now, the integration of the gender dimension in research and innovation content. Next slide. So this was already one of the sub-criterion under the excellence criterion in research and innovation actions in Horizon 2020 for some flagged topics. The big change in Horizon Europe is now it's a requirement by default. Next slide. So first just to underline that this is different from gender balance in the participation in the project or in the events that you will be organizing, such as conferences. This is really in the content, how you define your research question, how you select your research priority, how you collect data, how you report on it, who the project results and the applications will benefit to. This is really the content. So gender dimension is an umbrella term that covers sex analysis and or gender analysis into the content of research. And why this is important? Because every human or every animal is sexed, and all individuals are gendered, and paying attention to sex and or gender as a variable in your research will improve its excellence, its rigor, its reproducibility, there may be differences, and eventually will enhance creativity and open new market possibilities. Maybe I should also specify that when we talk about sex, we mean biological attributes. And when we talk about gender, these are social, cultural norms, identities, relations that will shape behaviors, but also products, technology, just as sex difference can also have an impact on the development and the impact of technologies. So this is why we are setting this as a default priority to be integrated across Horizon Europe. And this enhances societal relevance. So unless you see a sentence like the one that's in the green box here, in this topic, the integration of the gender dimension in research and innovation content is not a mandatory requirement, it means you have to do it. For cluster 5, however, you will never find this sentence. This is a decision of the cluster Sherpas and topic drafters. But you must know that there's always the possibility in your proposal to explain, justify why in your case, sex and/or gender are not relevant variables for the research you're carrying out. It will be the case in quite a number of topics in cluster 5. I'm just thinking of the development of perovskite photovoltaics. I doubt that gender or sex will be an important variable, but the idea is that you make sure that there's not previous literature, that you give the arguments for the non-relevance of the integration of the gender dimension in your specific proposal. Next slide. Because very often it's underestimated or not well known. And this is why we worked with a group of experts in different disciplines, and they have produced this policy report, which gives detailed methodology on sex analysis, gender analysis, and also intersectional analysis. So looking at intersection between sex and gender and other social categories. And they have developed case studies in different disciplines, different areas that cover very much the clusters in Horizon Europe. So there are some that are climate related, transport related, energy related. So I invite you to consult this report. You have the links here. There's also more information in the Horizon Europe program guide with additional resources to understand what it means and see examples and hopefully inspire you in your proposals. Next slide, please. Now, gender balance in research teams. Next slide. So for proposals that have the same scores, there's a system of priority ranking. First, cover aspects that are not otherwise, the projects that cover most of the requirements in the call will be ranked first. Then the score on the excellence criterion is looked at. Then the score on the impact criterion, it's reversed, of course, for innovation action. And then comes the gender balance among the research personnel that is primarily responsible for carrying out the research and innovation activities. So this is the named personnel in the researcher table that you see in the proposal template. And then comes geographical diversity and maybe other criteria. One thing that is a novelty also in Horizon Europe is that we are opening to self-declaration by researchers a third category, which is non-binary. So researchers can declare themselves as women, men, or non-binary. However, we do know from existing statistics that the non-binary population is quite limited, generally less than around 1%. So we are not taking this into account in the general gender balance criteria. However, we are inclusive in opening the possibility to self-declare as a non-binary to the researchers that want to do so. And I will skip to the next slide. Just some links, some resources. You will have these slides. Next slide. We have a specific webpage on gender equality and research and innovation policy. And there are specific sections there on gender equality in Horizon Europe and specifically on the gender equality plan, eligibility criterion. We have a FAQ on the gender equality plan criterion. We have a general fact sheet on all provisions. So you have the links here. Next slide. And there's also an available webinar that details a little bit more what I just presented today, which is still available to you on the Europa website. And I will stop here with the next slide. If you have specific question, next slide, please. You can write to us to these two functional mailbox that are available, one specifically for the JEP eligibility criterion and one more general if you have questions about gender equality provisions and requirements in our programs. Thank you. And I will leave the floor
Thanks, Anne. Yes, thanks, Anne. I saw you already had some questions in the Slido as well. We'll get to those in a minute. I'm told that we can extend the session by perhaps 15 minutes. I hope everybody will still be available. We started a little late, so let's make up for that. Hopefully we can answer all the questions that will come up. So with that, over to Alea, who will tell us about open science. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I cannot see the slides yet. Now, next slide, please. And the next one, please. So let me talk about open science. There are many definitions, of course, on open science, but we understand open science as sharing knowledge, data, and tools as early as possible in the research process and in open collaboration with all relevant research stakeholders. We have seen an evolution since a focus on open access in our policy and the framework programs to a broader concept now that we have on open science, which of course also integrates open access to scientific results. And what is new in Horizon Europe? Open science is embedded and mainstreamed in the framework program and during the project life cycle. So from the presentation of proposals, the evaluation and the project. With regard to the evaluation of proposals and open science is evaluated under the excellence criterion as part of the methodology and under quality and efficiency of implementation. Under the excellence criterion, proposals will have to provide up to 1 page and describe open science practices and up to 1 page to describe research data and output management. Under quality and efficiency of implementation, they will have to explain expertise on open science and within the list of publications, software, data relevant to the project. We expect publications to be open access, data sets to be fair accounts for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and as open as possible, as close as necessary. So open unless certain exceptions apply. I will elaborate on those exceptions later on. And very importantly, in Horizon Europe, the significance of publications will be evaluated on the basis of the proposer's qualitative assessment and not per the journal impact factor. So not used in the journal impact factor as a proxy for the excellence of research, but as on a basis of the qualitative assessment of research. What happens, for example, if one of the publications or several publications that they want to include in the list of publications that are relevant are not in open access? We strongly encourage those publications to be deposited in a repository and to provide open access to them. Next slide, please. So there are many different open science practices. There are some mandatory open science practices which are mandatory for Horizon Europe beneficiaries because they are set in the Horizon Europe Model Grant Agreement and because they can also be set additional mandatory open science practices at the level of the work program in the calls. I will explain those that are mandatory, and beyond those open science which are mandatory per the Model Grant Agreement or the work program, there are recommended open science practices. Which are those recommended open science practices? All open science practices which are not mandatory are recommended. Here you can see, and in the template for proposals, there is a list. Of course, it's a non-exhaustive list of recommended open science practices. And you can see early and open sharing of research, open access to research outputs beyond publications and data, participation in open peer review, or the involvement of citizens, very importantly. Next slide, please. Nota bene on evaluation. Next one, please. The evaluation, as I mentioned, concerns both mandatory and recommended open science practices, the letter where appropriate. Next, please. When open science practices are duly justified as not being appropriate for the project, the score will not be lower for not addressing those practices or for a lack of open science expertise. I emphasize duly justified, and all work programs except for the ERC evaluate open science practices as outlined above in the previous slides, with the exception with some EIC programs that for now evaluate under impact and not under excellence. Next one, please. So which are the mandatory open science practices? We can say that there are three pillars. Open access to scientific peer-reviewed publications, research data management, and additional open science practices. With regard to open access to scientific publications, of course, there is no obligation to publish in Horizon Europe, but if there is a publication, this publication has to be open access. And beneficiaries will have to ensure that there is immediate open access via a trusted repository under a Creative Commons Attribution License, CC BY or equivalent, and we allow CC BY no commercial, non-derivative for long text formats, books and monographs. So our beneficiaries can decide to publish in the venue they want, but they will have to provide immediate open access, that is at publication time, via a trusted repository. Trusted repository is defined in the annotated grant agreement that will be shortly be published, under open licenses to allow for maximum reuse of that publication. Beneficiaries must retain sufficient intellectual property rights to comply with those obligations, and open access publication fees are refundable only in full open access publishing venues. What does this mean? In those venues in which all content is openly accessible to all. There are some venues in which some content is openly accessible to everyone, but in which some content is only accessible to those with a subscription, for example, to a scientific journal. Our beneficiaries can publish there, can publish in such a venue, but the publication fees will not be refundable. And metadata of deposited publications must be open under a Creative Commons public domain dedication or equivalent, and in line with the FAIR principles that I mentioned before about findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. So this is the first pillar, let's say, about publications and the obligations that our beneficiaries have with regard to scientific peer-reviewed publications. Next slide, please. And now with regard to research data management and the additional obligations, so we can say categories 2 and 3 or pillars 2 and 3 of the mandatory open science practices. With regard to research data management, the focus is no longer on open access to research data, but on research data management. Research data management in line with the FAIR principles. Our beneficiaries will have to provide and regularly update a DMP, a data management plan, to deposit data in a trusted repository. Sometimes the call conditions will require that this repository is federated in the European Open Science Cloud and provide links to publications, if the case, and ensure open access as soon as possible and within the deadline set out in the DMP under a Creative Commons Attribution License or a public domain dedication or equivalent, unless exceptions apply. So here the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary, applies to research data. For publications, if there are publications, open access has to be provided, full stop. With regard to research data, the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary, applies. If there are legitimate interest, constraints, data protection, confidentiality, beneficiaries can decide to keep data closed. Information will have to be provided for the validation and reuse of data, and metadata has to be open under a public domain dedication or equivalent to the extent that legitimate interest or constraints are safeguarded and in line with the FAIR principles. And with regard to the third category of open science obligations, those are additional obligations. When imposed by the call conditions, they can impose additional obligations beyond those for publications and research data. And there are further obligations with regard to the validation of scientific publications, and in the case of public emergency, if requested by the granting authority. Those two latter, except for the ERC. For more information about those obligations, I encourage you to have a look at the Model Grant Agreement, the annotated grant agreement that will come up, and of course, all the resources and information that we have provided in the program guide, the Horizon Europe program guide, with extensive information on open science practices and on how to address those at the proposal stage, with a focus on the proposal stage. So I think that's the last slide. Next one, please, just in case, but I think that's the last one. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alia. So let's move right into questions. We have about 10-15 minutes left for that. What I would suggest is that we simply follow the same order of speakers that we had before. And to all the speakers, please try to perhaps bundle your answers. Some of the questions are rather similar, so perhaps you can give an answer to some of them at the same time. So let me set a good example in providing a very concise reply. The first question is about SSH. Yes, of course, SSH is all about multidisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity. We talk about SSH integration simply because so many times we start with a rather technical perspective to a given problem, and then we integrate the social sciences and humanities. You could conceivably do this the other way around. You could still conceivably start with social sciences and humanities and then integrate the more technical perspectives. It amounts to the same thing in the end in terms of an interdisciplinary perspective. So this is what it's all about. And with that, let me hand over to Tiet, who has two questions, and one is right up there, and the next one I'm going to try to push it up. Over to you, Tiet.
Yeah, many thanks. There is one question which is very dedicated. What do we have dedicated social innovation topics? And I have to reply yes and no for two good reasons. When we started to develop Horizon Europe work program, we thought that whether we should put forward dedicated social innovation topics, or we should rather try to include social innovation as a cross-cutting issue throughout Horizon Europe. And that was the way we decided to go, at least for the first work program. And I somehow believe that this is the right way to go also for the successive work programs. So therefore, you rather should consider social innovation in literally every topic which is there. Approximately 10 to 20% of the topics you find in Horizon Europe are hinting or mentioning social innovation in their topic description. But yes, also there are dedicated topics to social innovation, not in cluster 5. You find them more in cluster 6 on food security, local communities, and biodiversity. But you also find the social innovation dedicated topic, for example, in cluster 3 under the security program. So there are places where the work program drafting led to including dedicated social innovation topics. But otherwise, please consider it everywhere. And once again, I would like to say that this is an easy and relatively cheap, if I would use that straightforward word, way of enhancing the project and much increasing, very cost effectively to increasing the impact of the project. We are preparing very dedicated social innovative topics for the next work programs as a follow-up to the Horizon 2020 project, which was called Social Innovation Catalyst Fund. So where the social innovations could apply for dedicated funding and also scaling up. But as I said, this is still in making, and most likely we will see it in the next work program. Many thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. SSH, of course, is crucial for social innovation. I just saw that question. And before handing over to Vula, there was another question on the Bauhaus, the new European Bauhaus. And just to say that, yes, by all means, there are all sorts of crosscuts between the Bauhaus and what we're dealing with in Cluster 5, climate mobility and energy. In the building sector, for instance, there are all sorts of crosscuts, and you're really encouraged to really bring out those connections in the project proposals. So with that,
if I may, 20 seconds to add on the Bauhaus thing, that Bauhaus now has concluded its, let's say, preparatory phase where everybody was consulted very extensively from January onwards. And now they're analyzing all the inputs received through public consultation, through engagement events. And they say that in September, they come up with analysis, and then also it defines the directions to what the Bauhaus initiative specifically is going to put forward as a funding topics. But as Gert said,
So
Bauhaus as a concept is there out there, so nothing prevents your proposal already bringing the Bauhaus concept in and making links to.
exactly. And in September, you'll know even more about that. So with that, over to Vula. I'm a little conscious of time here.
Gert, I cannot see the slide though. Can I see the slide though, please?
That there. Okay. Can you see it now?
I cannot see questions on international cooperation.
Okay. Let me try to push them up. For some reason they are down there. Okay, here's one. You could start answering them. I'm pushing them up now.
The funding scheme for particular countries, they are all in the guide, and they're specific. It's really country by country. So I really advise that everybody that has a particular interest in some country to start from that and not to see what country is being funded. But it's, as I explained, the automatic funding is only for lower and medium income countries. And with the exception, which includes all low and middle income countries, with the exception of the BRIC and Mexico. Now, as the concerning some concerning the like-minded countries, I saw something on Australia. Well, for the moment, we are just in talks for the association. So what until a country becomes an associated country is the same provisions that they used to apply in Horizon 2020, and they are all in the guide. I cannot see any other question on international cooperation.
Maybe you could answer the one about sensitive topics, and then we'll move on to Anne.
Yes, for the sensitive topics, it's very important, as I told you, that we balance openness with safeguards and protection on European values. Not all the world shares them, and that there are very few topics, a very small percentage, in fact, of topics that under very good justification, they point out some limitations. But again, this is applies to a very exceptional situation. Our main condition is openness, and unless you don't work on this field and you have all the specific information there in the topic, it doesn't have any broader value apart to insist on this rebalancing between openness, reciprocity, and level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, Vula. Over to you, Anne. I'm going to push the tricky question that you received to the top. There were also a number of questions on how those GEPs are put together and what exactly goes into them. But let me hand you the hot potato first.
How much weight is on gender versus intersectional issues that are also way heavily on research results, sometimes more than gender alone. Yes, there's a cross-cutting priority on gender equality, but intersectionality is very much encouraged. So in your specific proposal, if you judge that other issues than gender are more important, you should justify it. But indeed, I mean, you should explain if you judge that gender is not or sex or gender are not the relevant variables for your proposal. But in many cases, and there is previous research that exists, or it has been under-researched and still plays an importance. But if you add an intersectional perspective, that's very much welcome. Okay, which organization needed JEP? So, oops, it disappeared. Sorry, I cannot read the Slido anymore. Can you put it back? Thank you. Does a research funder that is not a public body need one, or a research organization that is a private nonprofit? So really these categories, it's not specific to the JEP. These are the legal entity categories for all EU programs. So if you go on the Funding and Tenders portal, there's a document called, let me tell you exactly what the name is. So rules for legal entity validation, LEAR appointment, and financial capacity assessment. You will see in which category your organization fits in. A priori, you're a research organization, nonprofit, it applies to you. But if you're a research funder, you're not a research organization. And if you are not a public body, a priori does not apply. But really check in which category you do fit. Will there be a way, the EC, to certify that a JEP is compliant? For the eligibility criterion, the compliance is with having the 4 process-related mandatory requirements in. So that's what we will check in the random compliance checks that we will be carrying out. And that's the minimum that organization should comply with. But there will be guidance. There's already guidance existing, but more, because of course we want organization to engage in the process of implementing a gender equality plan, because this is part of our common framework, which is the new European research area. This is a commitment from member states in council conclusion. They put forward the JEP as an important instrument to advance gender equality. So this is what we will be looking for. So I guess you skipped, I see maybe a question on the JEP.
Yes, we're running really short on time.
Okay,
I was going
that's fine, I'll stop here.
You know, if that's okay with you. So
Okay.
over to you, Alea. There were a number of questions on open science. I pushed one up, which is rather generic. So perhaps you could start with that, but feel free to pick whichever other one you find most relevant among the questions.
Okay, I've seen a few of them. So indeed, please explain open science expertise. Having been engaged in open science practices, I would say all those open science practices that I put on the slides and I show, have you participated in open peer review? Have you had registered reports, open access publications, research data which is fair, engage in citizen science projects? So engagement, participation, experience in open science practices. This is what it means. With regard to the publications, I saw 2 questions on them. They are expected, the list of achievement, the publications are expected to be open access. And there was a question on whether that is unfair with regard to past publications. As I mentioned during the presentation, then we encourage you to deposit that publication in a repository, so at least it's on its way to open access, let's say. So if a publication was not published or provided open access to it, put it in a repository so that it's at least on its way to open access. And data sets, data is expected to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, so that evaluators themselves can also have access to the publications and to the data. And I think there was also another question on open science. The qualitative assessment. What is qualitative assessment of the publication? So not saying just because I've published in this journal, in this platform, I take for granted that there's excellent research. What is there? Explain what is the impact. Citation can be one of them. The wider impact it has had. Why do you consider that research excellent, very good research, and not just based on the impact factor of the venue in which you have published? So a qualitative assessment on your side of your research, and explain that, please. I think that's all for open science. I don't know if there are.
Yes, perhaps
Validated.
Running late here with the session. I think some of these questions perhaps can also be dealt with bilaterally, perhaps. There was also a question as to whether the presentations will be available after the information day. That's my understanding, that this session is being recorded. So my understanding is that the presentations will be available. So you will find the names of the presenters, and you'll also have the possibility of getting back to us and asking us some more specific questions that perhaps we couldn't answer here. But I'm a little conscious of time. I don't want to drag this on for too long. So with that, I don't see any new questions. So with that, I would like to bring the session to a close. Thank you to all the speakers, and thank you especially to the audience for bearing with us with the technical difficulties in the beginning, especially, and I hope we could answer your questions. Again, come back to us if we couldn't answer all your questions, or if there's anything else that you can think of. And with that, I wish you a great afternoon. Thank you.